The day Rose Jennings lost her sight was the same day Thomas Quinn rode into Wallace, Idaho. Though neither of them would know how their fates had already become entwined until 3 weeks later, when desperation brought her to the edge of the Snake River with nothing but darkness and the sound of rushing water to guide her. It was 1883, and the silver mining town nestled in the northern Idaho mountains had seen its share of tragedy. But few things struck the heart of a community quite like watching a young woman's light extinguish in the span of 48 fevered hours. Rose had been 22 years old, with steady hands that could thread a needle in lamplight without squinting and create wedding dresses that made even the hardest miners' wives weep with joy. Her shop on Bank Street had lace curtains she had sewn herself, and a painted sign that read, R. Jennings, fine seamstress, in elegant script that her father had commissioned before he died in a mine collapse 2 years prior. She lived in the 2 rooms above the shop, and though the work was solitary, she had never minded the quiet. Her fingers spoke a language all their own as they moved across silk and cotton, creating beauty from simple cloth. The fever had come on suddenly in late September, when the aspen leaves were turning gold across the mountainsides, and the first hint of winter whispered through the valley. It started with a headache that Rose attributed to eye strain from working late on Mrs. Henderson's daughter's wedding dress. By the next morning, she could barely stand, and by afternoon, Martha Green from the boarding house had found her collapsed on her workroom floor, burning hot to the touch and mumbling incoherently. Dr. Whitman did everything he could. The fever raged for 2 days, spiking so high that the women who sat with her feared she would not survive to see another dawn. But Rose's body was strong from years of hard work, and on the 3rd day, the fever broke. She opened her eyes to absolute darkness and screamed. The optic nerve, Dr. Whitman had explained gently, though his voice carried the weight of defeat. The fever damaged it. I have seen this before, though rarely. I am deeply sorry, Miss Jennings. The blindness appears to be permanent. The words had felt unreal, impossible. Rose had lain in her bed, staring at nothing, waiting for shapes to emerge from the blackness. But there was only void, complete and suffocating. The women of Wallace rallied around her, bringing food and sitting with her through the long nights when she wept until she had no tears left. But charity could only stretch so far in a mining town where everyone worked hard for every dollar. After 2 weeks, the visits became less frequent. After 3 weeks, Rose understood that she would need to figure out how to survive on her own, or she would not survive at all. That was when she found herself standing at the riverbank, listening to the water rush past, wondering if perhaps the darkness would be easier if she simply let it take her completely. The ground was uneven beneath her feet, and she had stumbled twice on the walk from town, following the sound of the river by memory. She stood there, the September wind cold against her face, trying to find the courage to take another step forward. "I would not do that if I were you," a man's voice said from somewhere to her left. "That current is stronger than it looks, and the rocks downstream would not be kind." Rose gasped and turned toward the voice, her hands coming up defensively. "Who is there?" "Name's Thomas Quinn, madam." "I was watering my horse when I saw you walking this way. You looked unsteady on your feet." "I am fine," Rose said, though her voice shook. "Please leave me be." She heard footsteps approaching, boots on rocky soil. "Cannot do that, madam. My mother raised me better than to leave a lady standing this close to a dangerous river." "You do not understand," Rose said, and she hated the break in her voice. "I have nothing left. I cannot work. I cannot take care of myself. I am useless now." The footsteps stopped a few feet away. "You are blind." It was not a question. "Yes," the word came out bitter. 3 weeks ago I had a life. I had a trade, I had a future. Now I have darkness and charity that is running out. So please, Mr. Quinn, go water your horse and let me make my own choices." There was a long silence. Rose could hear the horse snorting softly somewhere nearby, the rustle of wind through the pine trees, the endless rushing of the river. She wondered if he had left, if she was alone again. "My mother went blind when I was 15, Thomas said finally. "Not all at once like you, but gradual like over the course of a year. I watched her struggle with it, watched her want to give up. But she did not, and you know what she told me. She said the world did not disappear just because she could not see it anymore. She said she just needed to learn a new way of living in it." Rose felt tears burning behind her sightless eyes. "And how did she manage that?" "My father," Thomas said. "He told her he would be her eyes. Every morning he would describe the sunrise to her. When we went to town, he would tell her everything he saw. He helped her learn to cook again, to tend the garden, to move through the house. She lived another 12 years after she lost her sight, and some of them were the happiest years of their marriage, according to her." "That is a lovely story," Rose said, "but I do not have a husband, Mr. Quinn. I have no one." "You have me," Thomas said, and the certainty in his voice made her breath catch. "I know we just met, and you have every reason to think I am crazy, but I meant what I said. I will be your eyes." Rose shook her head. "You do not know me. You do not owe me anything." "Maybe not," Thomas agreed. "But I know what it looks like when someone is about to give up, and I know I cannot stand by and let that happen. Give me 1 month. Let me help you for 30 days, and if at the end you still want to come back to this river, I will not stop you. But at least give life another chance first." Rose wanted to argue, wanted to tell him to leave her alone, but something in his voice stopped her. It was not pity, which she had heard in abundance over the past weeks. It was determination, and beneath that, something that sounded almost like hope. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" "Because I could not do it for my mother," Thomas said quietly. "My father died in a logging accident when I was 17, and she grieved herself to death within 6 months. I was too young, too foolish, too wrapped up in my own pain to be what she needed. I have carried that regret for 8 years now. Maybe helping you will not erase that, but maybe it will mean something anyway." Rose stood there, swaying slightly in the wind, torn between the darkness that seemed so much easier and the tiny spark of something she was afraid to call hope. "1 month," she finally said. "But I do not expect miracles, Mr. Quinn." "Thomas," he corrected gently. "And I am not offering miracles, Miss Jennings, just partnership." He took her arm carefully, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and guided her back toward town. As they walked, he described everything they passed. The way the sunlight slanted through the pine trees, creating patterns of gold and shadow on the forest floor. The deer they startled, a doe with 2 spotted fawns who bounded away into the underbrush. The mountains that rose up around Wallace on all sides, already showing dustings of snow on their highest peaks. Rose listened, and despite herself, she began to picture it. Not with her eyes, which showed her only darkness, but with something deeper. She began to build a world in her mind from his words, and it was not the same as seeing, but it was not nothing either. Thomas helped her up the stairs to her rooms above the shop, describing each step, warning her about the loose board third from the top. Inside, he took in the space with the careful eye of someone assessing a situation. The workroom was neat, despite her absence, thanks to the women who had been checking on her. Bolts of fabric lined the walls on shelves, and a dress form stood in the corner draped with what looked like an unfinished wedding dress. "Tell me about your work," Thomas said, pulling out a chair for her at the table. Rose sat, folding her hands in her lap. "I was a seamstress. I made dresses, mostly. Wedding dresses were my specialty. I learned from my mother who learned from her mother. I have been sewing since I was old enough to hold a needle." "Was?" Thomas asked. "You speak as though that life is over." "It is over," Rose said flatly. "I cannot sew if I cannot see." "Can you not?" Thomas moved around the room and she heard him examining things. "Can you still feel fabric? Can your fingers still work a needle?" "That is not the point. I cannot see the stitches, cannot see the pattern, cannot see if the seams are straight." "But your fingers know what straight feels like, do they not? And you said you have been sewing since childhood. That means your hands have muscle memory. They know what to do." Rose shook her head. "It is not that simple. Show me." Thomas's voice was challenging now. "Pick up a needle and thread it. Let us see if your fingers have forgotten." "I cannot thread a needle blind," Rose protested. "Try." There was something in his tone that made her bristle, made her want to prove him wrong. She stood, using the table to orient herself, and then carefully made her way to where she knew her sewing basket sat on the shelf. Her fingers found it, and she brought it back to the table. Inside, she found a needle by touch and a spool of thread. She had threaded 1,000 needles in her life, maybe 10,000. Her fingers knew the weight of the needle, the way the eye felt against her fingertip. She unwound some thread, cut it with the small scissors from the basket, and brought the end to the needle. The first try missed. The second try missed. On the third try, she felt the thread slip through the eye, and she pulled it through with a small gasp of surprise. "See," Thomas said, and she could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "Your fingers remember. We just need to help them learn to work without your eyes." Over the next week, Thomas came to her rooms every day. He had taken a room at the boarding house and picked up work at the lumber mill on the edge of town, but every spare hour was spent with Rose. He was patient in a way that surprised her, never showing frustration when she knocked things over or misjudged distances. He began teaching her to navigate her rooms by counting steps and using the furniture as landmarks. 6 steps from the table to the window, he would say. The washstand is always 2 steps to the left of the bed. The cook stove is 8 steps from the door. He brought her to the shop below and helped her memorize that space too. He described where each bolt of fabric was stored, and she began to learn them by touch. Silk was smooth and cool, cotton was soft and had a slight texture, wool was thick and warm. She could feel the difference between calico and muslin, between satin and taffeta. Thomas also started describing people to her. When they walked through town, which they did every afternoon, he would tell her who was passing by. "Mrs. Henderson is crossing the street now, carrying a basket. She is wearing that blue hat you made for her last spring. She is smiling at you." Or, "That is Jacob Mills from the assayer's office. He is young, maybe 19, with red hair and freckles. He looks nervous around you, like he does not know what to say." Rose began to build a mental map of Wallace, a map made of sounds and smells and Thomas's descriptions. She learned to hear the difference between the street outside the mercantile and the street outside the saloon. She learned that the bakery on 3rd Street pumped out the smell of fresh bread every morning at 6, and that the blacksmith's hammer had a distinct rhythm that carried through the valley. But more than teaching her to navigate the physical world, Thomas was teaching her to trust again. Every time he took her arm, he warned her of obstacles. Every time he described something, he was detailed and honest. She began to rely on him, and that terrified her almost as much as the blindness itself. "What happens when the month is over?" she asked him one evening. They were sitting in her workroom, and she was practicing sewing a straight seam on a piece of scrap fabric. Her fingers moved carefully, feeling the edge of the cloth, keeping the stitches even by touch alone. "What happens when you have paid your debt to your mother's memory and you move on?" Thomas was quiet for a moment. She heard him shift in his chair. Is that what you think this is? Me trying to settle some old guilt, is it not? Rose set down her sewing. You said yourself that you carry regret about your mother. I do, Thomas admitted. But that is not why I am here anymore, Rose. Somewhere in the past week, this stopped being about my mother and started being about you. Rose's breath caught. What do you mean? I mean that I wake up thinking about whether you slept well. I mean that when I am at the mill, I am counting the hours until I can come see you. I mean that watching you thread that needle, seeing you refuse to give up even when you wanted to, made me realize that you are the strongest person I have ever met. And I want to keep being your eyes, Rose, not for a month, forever if you will let me. Rose felt her heart pounding. Thomas, you barely know me. Then let me know you better. His chair scraped as he moved closer. Let me keep helping you. Let me keep spending time with you. And maybe, if I am very lucky, you will come to feel something for me too. I am blind, Rose whispered. I cannot even see your face. I do not know what you look like. Then let me tell you. Thomas's voice was soft. I am 25 years old, tall enough that I have to duck through most doorways. My hair is dark brown, and I wear it longer than is probably fashionable because I keep forgetting to get it cut. My eyes are blue, like my mother's were. I have a scar on my left hand from a saw accident when I was learning the lumber trade, and another on my chin from when I fell out of a tree as a boy. I am not handsome in any remarkable way, but I am honest and I work hard, and I promise that I will never stop trying to be worthy of your trust. Rose reached out tentatively, and Thomas took her hand, guiding it to his face. She traced his features carefully, learning the shape of him through her fingertips. The strong jaw, the straight nose, the scar on his chin that was thin and smooth. His hair was indeed long, curling slightly at his collar. When her fingers brushed his lips, she felt him smile. I do not know how to do this, she said. I do not know how to trust someone so completely. My whole life I have taken care of myself. Even before I lost my sight, I was independent. And now I need you for everything, and that frightens me. You do not need me for everything, Thomas corrected. You are learning to do more on your own every day. Yesterday you made tea without help. This morning you dressed yourself and fixed your hair. Last week you would not walk to the outhouse without me holding your hand, and today you did it twice on your own. You are adapting, Rose. You are surviving. I am just here to make it easier. And if I learn to adapt completely, if I learn to manage without you, Thomas squeezed her hand, then I will be proud of you, and I will still want to be by your side, not because you need me, but because I need you. Rose felt tears slipping down her cheeks. I cannot see your face when you say these things. I cannot see if you mean them. You do not need your eyes for that, Thomas said. You can hear it in my voice, can you not? You can feel it in the way I hold your hand. Trust your other senses, Rose. They will not lie to you. And she realized he was right. She could hear the sincerity in his voice, could feel the gentle steadiness of his touch. She could smell the pine sap on his clothes from the mill and the soap he used to wash. She was learning him the way she had learned the layout of her rooms, the way she was learning to navigate her new life, through touch and sound and trust. I am afraid, she admitted. So am I, Thomas said, but maybe we can be afraid together. The weeks passed, and autumn deepened into early winter. Thomas continued working at the mill, and Rose began taking small sewing jobs again. At first, it was simple things: hemming trousers, mending tiers, replacing buttons. Thomas would describe the garment to her, and she would work by touch, her fingers finding the imperfections and fixing them with the skill that had never truly left her. Word spread through Wallace that Rose Jennings was sewing again, and slowly, carefully, more work came. Mrs. Patterson brought a dress that needed taking in. Mr. Chen from the Chinese grocery needed a shirt repaired. The work was not what it had been, but it was something, and every completed job made Rose feel a little more like herself again. Thomas was there for all of it, describing the colors of thread she needed, telling her if a seam was straight, helping her when she asked, but never taking over. He seemed to understand instinctively when she needed assistance and when she needed to figure things out on her own. They fell into a rhythm, a partnership that began to feel as natural as breathing. Thomas would wake early and stop by before work, making sure she had everything she needed for the day. At lunch, he would come back and they would eat together while he read to her from the newspaper or from one of the books he borrowed from the school teacher. In the evenings, after his work was done, he would return and they would walk through town, or sit in her workroom talking while she sewed. The people of Wallace began to notice. Martha Green from the boarding house mentioned to Rose that it was sweet, the way Thomas looked at her. Dr. Whitman, checking on Rose during one of his visits, remarked that he had never seen someone recover so well from such a devastating loss, and he attributed it entirely to having the right support. But there were others who were less kind. Rose heard the whispers, even if she could not see the faces behind them. She heard the words charity case and burden and once, horribly, blind leading the blind or just the blind being led. It was that last comment, overheard in the general store while Thomas was arranging for supplies to be delivered, that made Rose pull away. That evening when Thomas came to her rooms, she was distant, her answers short. "What is wrong?" Thomas asked, and she could hear the concern in his voice. "Nothing. Rose, I know you well enough now to know when something is bothering you. Talk to me." She set down the shirt she had been mending. "What are we doing, Thomas?" "What do you mean?" "I mean this. Us, what is this? Are you my caretaker, my friend, something more?" "Because people are talking and I realize I do not even know what to tell them." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "What do you want us to be?" "That is not fair. You cannot turn this around on me." "I am not trying to be unfair," Thomas said, "but I have been clear about my feelings, Rose. I told you weeks ago that I care about you, that I want to be with you. I am waiting for you to tell me how you feel." "How can I know how I feel?" Rose's voice rose in frustration. "I cannot see you. I cannot look into your eyes and know if what I am feeling is real, or if I am just clinging to the first person who showed me kindness when I was drowning." "Do you really think that little of yourself?" Thomas asked quietly. "Do you think you are so weak that you would mistake gratitude for something deeper?" "I do not know what I think anymore," Rose said, but her voice broke. "I am so confused, Thomas. I do not know if what I feel is love or dependence or just fear of being alone again. And I am terrified that you will realize one day that being someone's eyes forever is an exhausting burden that you do not want to carry." She heard Thomas move, felt him kneel in front of her chair. He took her hands in his. "Rose Jennings, you are the least burdensome person I have ever known. Yes, you need help sometimes. Yes, there are things you cannot do alone, but you are also funny and stubborn and talented and brave. You make me laugh, you make me think. You make me want to be better than I am, and being your eyes is not a burden, it is a privilege." "How can you say that?" Rose whispered. "How can you be sure?" "Because I am in love with you," Thomas said simply. "Not with the idea of you, not with some saintly version of you that I have built up in my head. With you. The real you, who gets frustrated when you spill things and who makes jokes about the dark being your new best friend, and who has the most incredible smile I have ever seen when you manage to do something difficult on your own. I love you, Rose, and I need you to decide if you can believe that." Rose sat very still, tears streaming down her face. She had not let herself hope, had not let herself believe that someone could love her as she was now, But Thomas's voice held no uncertainty, no doubt, just truth. "I cannot promise to be easy to love," she said finally. "I cannot promise that this will not be hard." "I am not asking for easy," Thomas said. "I am just asking for a chance." Rose pulled her hands from his and reached out, finding his face again. She traced the features she had memorized, the strong jaw and the crooked smile and the scar on his chin. "I think I might love you too," she whispered. "I think maybe I have been falling in love with you for weeks now, but I was too afraid to let myself believe it." "Then believe it," Thomas said. He leaned forward, giving her time to pull away, and kissed her gently. It was Rose's first kiss, and she had always imagined that when it happened, she would want to see the moment, to have the memory of it captured visually. But instead, she discovered that kissing in the dark was its own kind of magic. Every sensation was amplified. The warmth of his lips, the gentle touch of his hand on her cheek, the way her heart seemed to expand in her chest until she thought it might burst when they pulled apart. Rose was laughing and crying at the same time. "That was perfect," Thomas finished. "That was perfect." They sat there together, Thomas on the floor beside her chair, their hands intertwined, and talked until the night grew late. They talked about the future, about what it might look like. Thomas wanted to keep working at the mill, maybe save up enough to buy a small piece of land where they could build a house. Rose wanted to continue sewing, to prove to herself and to Wallace that she was still capable of her craft. "I want to try making a wedding dress again," she told him. "I have been thinking about it. Mrs. Henderson's daughter never did get her dress finished. It is still downstairs on the dress form. If I could finish it, if I could prove that I can still do the detailed work, then maybe other customers would come back." "Then we will make it happen," Thomas said. "Tell me what you need, and we will figure it out together." The next morning, Thomas brought the unfinished dress upstairs to Rose's workroom. He described it to her in detail: the white satin bodice with its intricate beading, the layers of tulle that made up the skirt, the lace sleeves that were only partially attached. "The beading pattern," Rose said, running her fingers over the bodice. "Can you draw it for me?" "I mean, describe it in terms I can understand." Thomas studied the pattern. "It is symmetrical. Starting from the center of the neckline, there are 3 large beads in a row going down. Then it branches out, 2 beads to each side, then 3, then 2 again, making a kind of diamond shape. The pattern repeats across the bodice." Rose nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the existing beads. She could feel the pattern, could sense the rhythm of it. "I need matching beads. Can you find them in my supplies?" They worked together all day. Thomas found the beads, threading needles when Rose's supply ran out, describing the overall effect as she added each new section. It was painstaking work, made even slower by her inability to see, but Rose refused to give up. Her fingers moved carefully, feeling for the right placement, testing each bead to make sure it was secure. By evening, she had completed 1/4 of the beading. Her fingers were sore and her back ached from sitting hunched over the work, but she felt a satisfaction she had not experienced since before the fever. She was creating again. She was practicing her art. "It is beautiful," Thomas told her. "Rose, you would not believe how perfect it looks. The beads catch the lamplight, every stitch is even. You have done this." Rose smiled, running her fingers over the section she had completed. She could feel the pattern, could sense the beauty of it even if she could not see it. "We have done this," she corrected. "I could not have managed without your descriptions." The work on the wedding dress continued over the next 2 weeks. Thomas would describe what needed to be done, and Rose would execute it, her skilled fingers adapting to their new way of working. She attached the lace sleeves, using tiny, nearly invisible stitches. She hemmed the skirt, measuring by feel and by the counting system she and Thomas had developed. She added the final touches, small satin buttons down the back, a delicate ribbon at the waist. When it was finished, Thomas insisted on bringing Mrs. Henderson to see it. Rose waited nervously upstairs while Thomas showed the dress to the woman in the shop below. She heard Mrs. Henderson's gasp, heard her voice rise in excitement. "Miss Jennings, I cannot believe it. It is more beautiful than I ever imagined. You finished it." Rose came down the stairs carefully, counting each step. "I am glad you are pleased, Mrs. Henderson. I wanted to make sure your daughter had the dress she deserved for her wedding." "But how did you? I heard that you—" Mrs. Henderson trailed off, clearly unsure how to address Rose's blindness politely. "I learned to sew differently," Rose said simply. "My fingers can still work. They just needed to learn to trust themselves without my eyes." Mrs. Henderson insisted on paying Rose double the original price, and she promised to tell everyone she knew about the beautiful dress the blind seamstress had created. True to her word, within a week, Rose had 3 new orders for dresses. None were as elaborate as the wedding dress, but they were real work, and each completed garment built her confidence a little more. As winter settled over Wallace, Thomas and Rose's relationship deepened. Thomas moved into the rooms above the shop, an arrangement that scandalized some of the older women in town, until Thomas made it clear that he intended to marry Rose as soon as she would have him. He proposed on Christmas Eve, 1883. They were sitting by the small stove in the workroom, the cold winter wind howling outside. Thomas had been describing the snow falling past the window, the way it caught the lamplight and sparkled like diamonds. "Rose," he said suddenly, "I know we have only known each other a few months. I know that by most standards we should wait longer, but I cannot imagine my life without you anymore. I do not want to spend another day not calling you my wife. Will you marry me?" Rose felt her heart racing. "Thomas, are you certain? Are you absolutely sure this is what you want? Because once we are married, you will be tied to me. People will always see you as the man who married the blind woman. Your life will always be more complicated because of me." "Our life," Thomas corrected. "And yes, I am certain. I have never been more certain of anything. You are my future, Rose. You are what I want, every single day for the rest of my life. So please say yes." Rose thought about all the reasons she should say no. She thought about the challenges they would face, the stares and whispers they would endure, the struggles that would come. But then she thought about Thomas's voice describing sunrises she could not see. She thought about his patience and his kindness and his unwavering belief in her. She thought about how much she loved him, how completely and thoroughly he had become part of her world. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married on New Year's Day, 1884, in a simple ceremony at the church. Rose wore a dress she had made herself, cream-colored wool with embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Thomas described everything to her before the ceremony. Who was sitting where? What flowers were on the altar? The way the winter sun came through the stained glass windows and painted colored light across the floor. When they spoke their vows, Rose faced Thomas, her hands in his, and spoke the words that bound them together. "I promise to trust you with my darkness, to believe in your words, to love you not just for being my eyes, but for being my heart. I promise to be your partner, your wife, your home, for as long as we both live." Thomas's voice was thick with emotion when he responded. "I promise to describe the world to you every day, to never let you feel alone in the darkness, to love you with everything I have. I promise to be worthy of your trust, to stand beside you through whatever comes, to be your husband and your eyes forever, for as long as we both live." When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed Rose while the small congregation applauded. Martha Green dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Dr. Whitman nodded approvingly. Even Mrs. Henderson, whose daughter's wedding dress had started Rose's return to work, was smiling broadly. The celebration after the ceremony was modest, held in the boarding house dining room with cake and coffee. Rose and Thomas stood together, accepting congratulations, and Rose listened to the sounds of happiness around her. She could hear the genuine warmth in people's voices, could sense that Wallace had come to accept their unusual love story. That night, in their rooms above the shop, Thomas undressed Rose slowly, describing every movement, every touch. He told her she was beautiful, and for the first time since losing her sight, Rose believed it. Not because she could see herself, but because she could hear the truth in his voice, feel the love in his hands. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. There were moments when Rose's frustration with her limitations boiled over, when she threw fabric across the room in anger or wept with the unfairness of her situation. Thomas learned to weather these storms, to give her space when she needed it, and to hold her when she did not want to be alone. There were also moments when Thomas struggled with the responsibility of being Rose's primary connection to the visual world. Sometimes he was tired from long days at the mill, and describing everything felt like an insurmountable task. But he never complained, never made Rose feel like a burden, and on the days when he was struggling, Rose seemed to sense it and would tell him stories instead, filling the silence with her own words so that he could rest. They learned each other's rhythms, each other's needs. They learned to communicate in ways that went beyond words. A squeeze of the hand could mean, "I need you," or "I am here," or "I love you." The tone of a voice could convey more than any visual cue. Rose's sewing business grew steadily. By the summer of 1884, she was making dresses for women all over the valley. Some came out of curiosity, wanting to see if the blind seamstress was truly as skilled as people claimed. But they came back because Rose's work was exceptional. Her fingers created perfect seams, even hems and beautiful details. The fact that she worked without sight became a testament to her skill rather than a limitation. Thomas continued working at the mill, and with both of them earning steady income, they began to save money. They talked about their dreams for the future. Thomas wanted a small farm, a place where they could keep chickens and maybe a cow, where Rose could have a garden and he could build a separate workshop for her sewing. In the fall of 1884, Rose realized she was pregnant. She was 23 years old, and the news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. Dr. Whitman confirmed it, and when Rose told Thomas that evening, he lifted her off her feet and spun her around, laughing with delight. But that night, alone in their bed, Rose voiced her fears. "How will I care for a baby, Thomas? How will I know if it is sick or hurt? How will I watch over it and keep it safe?" Thomas pulled her close. "The same way you do everything else, with your other senses. You will learn the sound of different cries, the feel of a fever, the smell of illness. And I will be here, Rose. We will do this together, the same way we do everything." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Rose continued sewing, though Thomas insisted she take on fewer jobs as her due date approached. He became even more attentive, describing the changes in her body that she could not see, telling her she glowed with motherhood, making her laugh when she felt large and ungainly. Their son was born in May of 1885, after a long labor that left Rose exhausted but elated. Dr. Whitman placed the baby in her arms, and Rose ran her hands over every inch of him, learning him by touch. The shape of his head, the tiny fingers and toes, the softness of his skin. "What does he look like?" she asked Thomas, who was sitting beside the bed, tears streaming down his face. "He has dark hair like both of us," Thomas said, his voice awed. "And the most perfect little face. His eyes are blue, though the doctor says they might change. He looks like you, Rose. He has your nose and your chin. He is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." They named him James, after Rose's father. Thomas described him to Rose constantly, telling her when he smiled, when he opened his eyes, when he moved his little hands. Rose learned to care for James by touch and sound, learning to distinguish between his hungry cry and his tired cry, his discomfort and his need to be held. The people of Wallace were skeptical at first, worried about how a blind woman could possibly care for an infant. But Rose proved them wrong, the same way she had proven them wrong about sewing. She was a devoted mother, attentive and loving. When James was old enough to crawl, she and Thomas worked together to make their home safe, removing hazards and creating clear paths. As James grew into a toddler, he became Rose's eyes in unexpected ways. Thomas taught him early to tell his mother when he moved from room to room, to describe things he saw. By the time James was 3 years old, he would take his mother's hand and lead her carefully, warning her of obstacles just as his father did. In 1887, Rose gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Clara. She had Thomas's blue eyes and Rose's dark hair, and James was immediately smitten with his baby sister. Rose's confidence in her mothering had grown with James, and caring for Clara felt more natural, less frightening. Thomas continued to work at the mill, but he had also begun buying small parcels of land on the outskirts of Wallace. By 1888, he had accumulated enough acreage to start building the house he had promised Rose. It was modest but well made, with wide doorways and a logical layout that Rose could learn easily. Thomas built a large workroom for Rose's sewing, with shelves exactly where she wanted them, and a system for organizing her supplies that made sense without sight. They moved into the new house in the spring of 1889, when James was 4 and Clara was 2. Rose walked through it for the first time, counting steps, learning distances, memorizing the layout. Thomas had planted a garden, and he described it to her in detail, telling her where each vegetable grew so she could harvest them by feel and smell. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Rose's sewing business thrived, with women coming from as far as 20 miles away to have dresses made by the blind seamstress of Wallace. Thomas eventually left the mill and focused on the farm, which had grown to include chickens, 2 cows, and a small orchard. The children grew healthy and happy, learning from both parents that challenges were meant to be overcome, not surrendered to. James started school in 1890, and he would come home each day and describe everything he had learned to his mother. He drew pictures that he described in elaborate detail, and Rose would feel them with her fingers, tracing the shapes even though she could not see them. Clara, when she was old enough, did the same, both children understanding instinctively that their mother experienced the world differently, but that it did not make her any less capable or loving. The years passed with the steady accumulation of ordinary moments that made up a life. There were hard times, certainly. A drought in 1891 that nearly destroyed their crops. A winter when James got pneumonia and Rose sat up with him for 3 nights straight, her hands on his chest feeling his breathing, knowing by sound and touch when the crisis had passed. Moments when Rose grieved the sight she had lost, when she longed to see her children's faces, to watch them grow. But there were far more good times than bad. Summer evenings sitting on the porch while Thomas described the sunset and the children played in the yard. Christmas mornings, when James and Clara would describe their gifts to Rose in excited detail. The day in 1893 when Thomas took them all to see the new railroad depot, and Rose felt the vibration of the train coming down the tracks, powerful and alive. In 1895, when Rose was 34 and Thomas was 37, they had their third child, a son they named Daniel. Rose was older now, more tired but no less capable. James, who was 10, and Clara, who was 8, helped care for their baby brother, and the house was filled with the noise and chaos of a growing family. Rose's parents would have been proud of what she had built from the ashes of her tragedy. She had not just survived losing her sight, she had thrived. Her work was respected, her children were loved, her marriage was strong. She had learned to navigate a world of darkness with grace and determination, and in doing so, she had taught everyone around her what was possible. Thomas never stopped being her eyes. Even after 20 years of marriage, even when the children could describe things just as well as he could, Thomas continued his habit of telling Rose everything he saw. The way the aspen leaves turned gold every fall. The way James looked so much like Rose's father in an old photograph. The way Clara had Thomas's stubborn chin and his habit of tilting her head when she was thinking. The way baby Daniel's smile could light up a room. But more than describing the visual world, Thomas had taught Rose to see with her heart. She understood her children's moods by the sound of their footsteps, knew when Thomas was tired by the way he sighed when he sat down, could sense the changing seasons by the smell of the air and the feel of the wind. Her world was different from what it had been before the fever, but it was no less full, no less rich. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1904, Thomas and Rose stood on the porch of their home, holding hands and listening to the sounds of their children playing in the yard. James was 19 now, working at the mill and courting a girl from town. Clara was 17, helping her mother with the sewing business and talking about becoming a teacher. Daniel was 9, full of energy and curiosity. "You remember that day at the river?" Rose asked. "When you stopped me from giving up, every day," Thomas said. "I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever met, standing there on the edge of everything, trying to find your way forward." "I was not brave," Rose said. "I was terrified. I was ready to let the darkness win." "But you did not," Thomas said. "You chose to live, you chose to try, and look at what we have built." Rose smiled, turning her face toward the sound of her children's laughter. "We built it together. You kept your promise, Thomas. You have been my eyes forever." "And you have been my heart," Thomas said. "You have been my reason for everything. Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life." Rose Quinn. They stood there as the sun set, Thomas describing the colors painting across the sky while Rose listened and felt the warmth of his hand in hers. The world around them was beautiful, she knew, even if she could not see it. Beautiful because of the love they had built, the family they had created, the life they had chosen to live fully despite the darkness. As the years continued to pass, the Quinn family became a fixture in Wallace. Thomas expanded their farm, and James eventually took over most of the work when Thomas's back began to trouble him in his later years. Clara married a schoolteacher named Robert, and they built a house just down the road, giving Rose grandchildren to love and describe to. Daniel, the youngest, showed an aptitude for numbers and went to work at the bank in town, but he visited his parents every Sunday without fail. Rose continued sewing until she was in her 60s, her fingers never quite losing their skill even as they became gnarled with age. Women still came to her for their most important dresses, trusting in the craftsmanship of the blind seamstress, who had never let her disability define her limitations. Thomas and Rose aged together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had their share of sorrows. Thomas's brother died in a mining accident in 1907. Clara lost her first baby, born too early to survive. James's wife developed tuberculosis and spent 2 years fighting it before finally recovering. But through it all, they had each other, and they had the family they had built together. In 1920, Rose and Thomas celebrated their 36th wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even 2 great-grandchildren. Rose was 59 years old, and Thomas was 62. His dark hair had gone gray, and Rose loved to run her fingers through it, teasing him about looking distinguished. Her own hair, which he still brushed every night, had threads of silver woven through the darkness. "Tell me what they look like," Rose said that evening, sitting in the parlor of their home with the family gathered around them. "Tell me about our legacy." Thomas looked around the room, his eyes misty with emotion. "James is tall and strong, with your determination in every line of his face. He is a good man, Rose, a good father to his 3 children. Clara has your grace and your talent. She teaches at the school and her students adore her. She has your patience and your kindness. Daniel has my mother's blue eyes and your father's quick mind. He is doing well at the bank, and he speaks of you constantly, telling everyone that his success came from learning mathematics from his mother, who could calculate measurements and figures in her head better than anyone with sight." "And the grandchildren?" Rose asked. "They are beautiful, every one of them," Thomas said. "They have pieces of both of us in them. Emma has your laugh. Michael has my stubbornness. Little James, who we call Jamie, has your smile. Sarah has your talent with a needle. They are good children, Rose. We raised good children, and they are raising good children. We have done well." Rose reached for Thomas's hand, finding it as easily as she always did. "We have done more than well. We have built a life, Thomas. A real, full, beautiful life. And it started because you refused to let me give up, because you promised to be my eyes. And you gave me purpose," Thomas said. "You gave me a reason to be the man I wanted to be. You gave me love and family and a life worth living. You saved me just as much as I saved you, Rose, maybe more." They sat together as the family talked and laughed around them, and Rose realized that she had no regrets. She had lost her sight at 22 years old, lost what she thought was everything. But in the darkness, she had found something far more valuable. She had found love that was patient and kind and enduring. She had found a partner who valued her not despite her blindness, but as the complete person she was. She had found purpose in her work, joy in her children, and peace in a life well lived. The fever had taken her eyes, but it had not taken her life. Thomas had made sure of that. And together, they had proven that love did not need sight to see clearly, that partnership did not require perfection, and that the most beautiful things in life were often found in the darkness, waiting to be discovered by touch and trust and unwavering faith in each other. As the evening grew late and the family began to leave, kissing Rose and Thomas goodbye and promising to visit again soon, Thomas helped Rose to their bedroom. It was a room they had shared for over 3 decades, and Rose knew every inch of it. Thomas helped her undress and braided her hair the way he did every night, his fingers gentle and familiar. "What are you thinking about?" Rose asked as they settled into bed, her head on his shoulder. "I am thinking about that day at the river," Thomas said. "I am thinking about how close I came to never knowing you, how different my life would have been if I had not stopped to water my horse at that exact moment, how empty everything would have been without you. Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had not taken on the burden of a blind woman?" Rose asked. It was a question she had asked before over the years, always needing reassurance. "You were never a burden," Thomas said firmly. "And I do not wonder about other lives, because this life, this one right here with you, is the only one I have ever wanted. You are my greatest joy, Rose. You always have been." Rose smiled in the darkness that was her constant companion. "And you are mine. My eyes, my heart, my everything. I love you, Thomas Quinn. I will love you for whatever time we have left, and I will love you beyond that." "Then we are both very lucky," Thomas said, kissing the top of her head. "Now sleep, my love. I will still be here when you wake up. I will always be here." And he was. Through the passing years, through the inevitable decline that comes with age, Thomas was always there. When Rose's joints became too stiff to sew, he rayed to her for hours. When Thomas's health began to fail in his 70s, Rose cared for him with the same dedication he had always shown her. They were partners to the end, each one caring for the other, each one refusing to imagine a life apart. Thomas died peacefully in 1932 at the age of 74, with Rose holding his hand. His last words to her were, "Thank you for letting me be your eyes. It was the greatest honor of my life." Rose lived for 3 more years without him, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, still telling the story of how a cowboy had stopped her at the river's edge and promised to be her eyes forever. She told them about the love that had grown from that promise, about the life they had built together, about the way Thomas had never wavered in his devotion. When Rose died in 1935 at the age of 74, her family buried her next to Thomas on a hill overlooking Wallace. On the shared headstone beneath their names and dates, James had carved the words, "He was her eyes, she was his heart. Together they saw clearly." The story of Rose Jennings and Thomas Quinn became part of Wallace's history, passed down through generations. The blind seamstress who had refused to give up, and the cowboy who had loved her enough to become her eyes. It was a story about loss and love, about darkness and light, about finding hope in the most unexpected places, and it was a story about promises kept. Thomas had said he would be Rose's eyes forever, and he had been. Through every sunrise he described, every color he named, every face he painted with words, he had given her the world. And in return, Rose had given him purpose, love, and a life filled with meaning. Their legacy lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the values they had instilled, in the example they had set. They had proven that disability did not mean inability, that love could overcome any obstacle, and that sometimes the darkest moments in life could lead to the brightest futures. The house they had built together remained in the family for generations, and their descendants would walk through it, touching the shelves Thomas had made for Rose's sewing supplies, sitting on the porch where they had spent countless evenings together, and remembering the love story that had started with a promise at the river's edge. In Wallace, Idaho, the tale of the blind seamstress and her devoted husband became legendary, a reminder that true love was not about seeing with your eyes, but about seeing with your heart. It was about finding someone who would walk with you through the darkness, who would describe the world when you could not see it, who would love you not in spite of your challenges, but because of the complete person you were. Thomas and Rose had lived through triumph and tragedy, joy and sorrow, health and illness. They had built a family, a home, a life together. And through it all, they had loved each other with a devotion that transcended the ordinary, that reached into something eternal and unshakable. Their story ended as all stories must, with death and loss and the inevitable march of time. But it also ended with fulfillment, with a life well lived, with love that had lasted a lifetime and beyond. They had promised forever to each other on that day by the river in 1883, and they had kept that promise until the very end. And their love had proven that forever was real, that promises mattered, and that even in the deepest darkness, there could be light if you had someone to share it with, someone to be your eyes, your heart, your everything, forever and always.